on live television in a moment of unforeseen and intense emotion. The legendary Hollywood actor Morgan Freeman was presented with a letter dispatched personally by Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso. As Freeman's eyes fell upon the words, a hush descended upon the studio, and then an event transpired that no one had ever witnessed. He began to weep. What message did the letter contain? What rendered it so profoundly moving? This remarkable exchange has captivated and moved millions across the globe. It was set to be an ordinary Thursday morning in Los Angeles. Morgan Freeman was seated comfortably on the set of a popular morning show. The host, Olivia Sanders, flashed a warm smile and engaged him in conversation about his most recent film. The audience applauded politely, sipping their coffee, captivated by the resonant and familiar timbre of his voice. Suddenly, Olivia broke from the script. "We have something quite unique for you today," she announced, retrieving a simple brown envelope from beneath her desk. No postal marks, just a single line, from President Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Morgan took the envelope, holding it with a reverence, his hands exhibiting the faintest tremor. The host remained silent. The audience leaned forward, collectively holding its breath. He carefully lifted the flap to reveal a single handwritten page. As his gaze drifted over the opening lines, a visible transformation occurred in his demeanor. His characteristic smile vanished, his lips parted as if to speak, yet no sound emerged, and then his voice faltered. The room was utterly still as the world prepared to see something unprecedented. Morgan's fingers clenched the paper. His eyes, typically a source of calm strength, started to glisten with moisture. For an individual who had spent a lifetime in front of the camera, this moment was starkly different. He cleared his throat and started to read in a soft tone. "To the voice that gave our stories life when we were overlooked, to the man who lent dignity to our suffering." With each phrase, the room plunged into a deeper quiet. The camera slowly framed his face, revealing his trembling hands. "You did not merely act. You brought healing. You did not simply narrate. You restored our sense of worth." His voice broke once more as a solitary tear traced a path down his cheek. Olivia, the host, was clearly affected but held her silence, affording him the moment. "I write to you from a nation many have ignored, but you did not. In your voice, we recognized ourselves. In your performances, we saw our fathers, our aspirations." Morgan had to stop. He was unable to continue reading. He let the letter fall into his lap and buried his face in his hands. The man who had given voice to the world's sorrows was now experiencing his own moment of unvarnished truth, all prompted by a letter from a president few could have predicted. For a long count, there was no sound. Then, a single, soft sob emanated from the audience. A woman in the front row had tears streaming down her face. A man next to her clutched his chest, visibly overcome. Morgan attempted to compose himself, dabbing at his face with a handkerchief. I was not prepared for this," he murmured, his voice shaking. "This is ... something else." He looked toward Olivia, his eyes still damp. "I've been given awards, received standing ovations, been granted honorary doctorates, but no letter, no single gesture has ever affected me this way." The host reached out and took his hand, not as a journalist comforting a guest, but as one human being connecting with another's raw vulnerability. Olivia faced the camera, her voice gentle. "You have just been part of something authentic, something incredibly rare. A communication from one leader to another spanning oceans and decades." In the control room, the producers were stunned into inaction, none daring to cut for a commercial break. The clip was already erupting online, with people sharing it under a simple, powerful caption: "Morgan Freeman cries on live TV, and we cried with him." But the mystery of the letter's remaining contents was only just beginning to unfold. That evening, sleep eluded Morgan Freeman. The letter lay on his bedside table, illuminated by a soft lamp. He read it repeatedly, each time more slowly than the last. There was a section he had not shared on the broadcast, a passage too intimate, too powerful for that moment. "I was raised in a small village in the northern part of Burkina Faso," the letter detailed. "We lacked running water and electricity. But once a month, a truck would arrive carrying a generator and a screen, and we would watch films. Morgan paused, his hand on his chest. The very first voice I ever heard speaking English was yours. I could not comprehend the words, but I could feel their meaning. Tears welled in his eyes once more. The following morning, Morgan contacted the show's production team. I need to finish reading that letter on air, he declared. Back at the studio, the producers were hesitant. It was an unscheduled segment, not aligned with any promotional tours. But having witnessed the online reaction millions of views in a single night, they agreed. Morgan would return to complete what he had started, though neither he nor the world could anticipate what would follow. The studio was filled to capacity. The cameras were set. There was no introductory music, just a profound silence. Morgan Freeman entered the stage, holding the letter. No script, no teleprompter. Olivia welcomed him, but he only offered a nod, looked out at the audience, and started to speak. This letter is not solely for me. It is for every one of us. He then read the next part aloud. When I became a soldier, I held your words in my heart. Hope is the thing with feathers, he once quoted. I recalled that line every night in the forest. The room fell silent again. Mr. Freeman, your voice supplied me with courage. I now lead a nation that continues to struggle for its very existence, but I have never forgotten that voice. That voice returned my name to me. At this statement, Olivia let out a soft gasp. Morgan then paused, lifting his gaze slowly, his eyes filled with emotion. How? ... How can a man possibly reply to something of this magnitude? Viewers at home were in tears. Social media was inundated with comments. This isn't a letter, it's a mirror to the human soul. But the letter had not yet yielded all its secrets, and its most poignant revelation was still to come. Just as Morgan was refolding the letter, a small photograph slipped out and drifted to the floor. He retrieved it carefully. It was a black and white picture of a small, barefoot boy standing before a tattered sheet stretched between two posts of a makeshift cinema screen. Behind him, other children were seated on logs, their eyes fixed on the image of Nelson Mandela being portrayed on that screen. Morgan's voice caught in his throat. That's me, he whispered. That's from Invictus. Olivia leaned closer. You were their champion. Morgan turned the photograph over. In neat handwriting were the words, This was the night I resolved, one day aid my people, and you, your voice. You gave me that dream. The studio was consumed by a complete and total silence. Even members of the camera crew were wiping away tears. Morgan then turned directly to the live camera. President Traoré, if you are watching, please understand this. Your letter has transformed me. It has reminded me of the very reason I first stepped in front of a camera. Backstage, producers fielded calls from major networks. People were not merely watching, they were feeling, and millions across the planet were anxiously waiting to learn what would happen next, while the letter became a global news sensation. A quiet but pressing request was transmitted from Ouagadougou to Los Angeles. President Traoré wished to meet with Morgan Freeman in private. No cameras, no media, just a meeting between two individuals, one who communicated through cinema, the other who embodied its message. Initially, Morgan was hesitant. His schedule was demanding, his emotions still raw. Yet something about the letter compelled him. 3 days after the broadcast, Morgan found himself on a plane. Its destination, Burkina Faso. On the flight, he gazed out the window, the folded letter clutched in his hand. He whispered aloud to himself, I have to look this man in the eyes. As his plane traversed the Atlantic, social media was ablaze with hashtags like #TheLetter, that broke Freeman. But none of these observers knew that this journey was on the verge of revealing something far more profound, something entwined with Morgan's own past, a secret he had never shared with the world. All connected to a dusty village, a projector screen, and a boy who dared to dream. The sun was just breaking the horizon as the jet landed in Burkina Faso. Morgan was met with minimal ceremony, just a lone government vehicle and a translator named Owa. During the drive, Awa spoke in a low voice. The president, he does not reveal this side of himself to many. But your letter, it held immense significance for him. Morgan looked at her. Why me? She offered a smile. Because you offered him hope when hope was a scarce commodity. They journeyed through villages, coming to life, observing women carrying water, children walking barefoot toward school, and men mending broken bicycles. It was all incredibly tangible. When they reached the presidential compound, Ibrahim Traoré was already waiting. He was not wearing a suit or any medals, just a simple shirt and a composed expression. Morgan exited the car slowly. The two men regarded each other, exchanging no words, only a silent, mutual acknowledgement. Traoré moved forward, holding a faded photograph. "Do you recognize this boy?" Morgan accepted it. It was the same black and white picture, but clearer now. The boy's eyes, they looked like his own from his youth. "Wait," Morgan breathed. "This child resembles my cousin." Ibrahim rested a hand on his shoulder. "He was not just watching you, he was waiting for you." Inside the compound, the president guided Morgan to a secluded garden free of bodyguards and aides. There, beneath a large tree, Ibrahim started to speak, not as a head of state, but as the boy who remembered. "After my father passed away, I had nothing," he explained. "But I found a new father in a voice that told stories, that gave dignity back to broken people." Morgan sat motionless, his hands trembling. Then Traoré leaned forward. "There is something I have never revealed to the world. I had a brother. His name was Kosi. He looked exactly like you." Morgan's breath hitched. "I had a cousin named Kosi. We lost him. No one ever knew what happened to him." Traoré retrieved a worn document from a folder. It was a photo of Kosi standing next to a younger Ibrahim, both of them smiling. Morgan was stunned. "We would share stories about you every night until the day he vanished." Suddenly, the meeting was no longer just about the letter. It was about family, history, and sorrow. The past was not merely intersecting with the present, it was crying out for reconciliation. And Morgan understood that there was more to this journey than he could ever have foreseen. Morgan walked at a slow pace, beside President Traoré through a quiet village on the outskirts of the capital. Children waved, oblivious to the emotional weight the two men carried. Traoré paused beside a weathered wall and pointed. Scratched faintly into the brick was a name, Kosi Freeman. Morgan froze. This was his name after he left America. He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Traoré affirmed with a nod. "He said he wanted to preserve your family name, to pay tribute to you." Morgan knelt, tracing the name with his fingertips. It appeared to have been etched there for decades. "He always said he wanted to be like you, but he couldn't return." "Why?" Morgan asked, his throat tight. Traoré averted his gaze. "There was something he was ashamed of, something he never confided in me." He felt the Freeman name deserved better than what he believed he had become. Tears welled in Morgan's eyes. He was just a boy. The air felt thick with unspoken grief. This was no longer just about a letter. It was a homecoming to something long interred sorrow, guilt, and an opportunity for healing. But the most heart-wrenching truth was still to be revealed. President Traoré escorted Morgan to an old structure, a simple one-room house. "This was Kosi's room," he said softly. "We've kept it exactly as he left it." Morgan stepped over the threshold. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams filtering through a cracked window. On a small wooden shelf were old VHS tapes, books in English, and a single torn photograph of Morgan smiling on the set of Lean on Me. Beside it lay a journal. Morgan opened it, his hand shaking as he read the first entry. "To my cousin Morgan, whom I love more than he will ever know. I did not run away. I was taken, but I remained here because I was needed." Tears streamed down Morgan's face. Kosi had been abducted from America as a teenager, and somehow, after escaping his captors, he never went back. "He taught me English," Traoré said quietly. "He taught many of us. He helped build this village's school. He saved lives." Morgan sank onto the edge of the bed, speechless. He had mourned Kosi, grieved him as lost forever. Now, he was discovering that his cousin had been a hero. Later that night, Morgan sat outside under the stars, clutching Kosi's journal to his chest. President Traoré joined him, carrying a second letter. "This one," he said quietly, "was intended. For you, Kosi wrote it, but he never sent it. He gave it to me before he died." Morgan's breath caught. He unfolded the fragile envelope with care. Inside was a handwritten letter, aged but legible. "Dear Morgan, I still hear your voice in my dreams. When life became difficult, I would think of your characters, your power, your strength. I did not return because I was afraid you had forgotten me, but I never forgot you." Morgan closed his eyes. "You gave me the courage to stay and to help. I may have vanished from your world, but you never vanished from mine. I hope one day you will come here and witness what your voice helped create. With love, your little brother Kosi." Morgan broke down, weeping not with shame, but with a profound mix of gratitude, pain, and love. For the first time, the silence he had carried for decades was shattered, and his journey was not finished. Morgan and Traoré sat in the courtyard. Beneath a dim lantern, Kosi's letter still resting on Morgan's lap, as if his cousin had just spoken. Traoré said gently, "Kosi never ceased his efforts to help, even after he became sick." Morgan looked up quickly. "He was ill." Traoré nodded. "Malaria. He refused to leave the village. He said his story had to conclude where it began with the people." Morgan fought back tears. "He died here." Traoré handed him another item, a faded photograph of Kosi, smiling weakly, surrounded by children holding books. "He taught them to read using the scripts from your movies," Traoré said with a sad smile. "Shawshank Redemption, Invictus, they knew every line." Morgan's heart ached. He had always thought his greatest legacy was his work on film. Now he saw the truth was different. It wasn't the parts he played on a screen, but the hope his voice had given to someone the world had overlooked. And in that hope, Kosi had found his life's meaning. And now, perhaps, Morgan had found his own. But Traoré had one final revelation, a promise waiting to be honored the next morning. Morgan was driven deep into a rural community. Children ran. Alongside the car, waving and smiling, their energy infectious. They stopped by a dusty path. Ahead stood a small schoolhouse, freshly painted. Above the entrance, a hand-carved sign read, "Kosi Freeman Community School for Hope." Morgan's hands flew to his mouth. Traoré stood beside him and said softly, "This school is here because of him." "And because of you," Morgan entered the building. The walls were adorned with students' drawings. A classroom buzzed with the laughter and voices of children reading in English. A teacher greeted him and passed him a notebook. Inside were messages from the students. "Dear Morgan Freeman, thank you for inspiring our teacher to dream big. Your voice helped us to believe." Another read, "Kosi told us you were a king. We think you are one too." Morgan sat down on a small bench, completely overwhelmed. He had never imagined his legacy would be found here, in Burkina Faso, in this small school built on sacrifice, brotherhood, and a love that spanned continents. He looked at Traoré and whispered, "You have done more than just lead, Mr. President. You have healed a part of me I thought was forever broken." Before Morgan's flight back, Traoré hosted a small evening gathering with the villagers. There were no reporters, no cameras, just people. An old man played gentle music on a kora, and children performed a skit inspired by Morgan's film, The Bucket List. Everyone laughed, including Morgan. At the conclusion, Traoré stood and presented a wooden box carved with West African motifs. He opened it and offered Morgan a medal. "This is not from the government," he said. "This is from the people, for the man who gave us a voice when we had none." Morgan accepted it, speechless. In that instant, he was not an actor or a celebrity. He was simply a man who had unknowingly touched a world he had never seen. As the stars shone brightly above, Morgan whispered a prayer for Kosi, for the children. "For Traoré, thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Traoré smiled. "No, thank you." And with that, a wound that had been open for decades finally began to heal. But the world was not yet finished with this story, because when Morgan returned home, he brought with him something that would alter everything, a final message for all to hear. 3 days after arriving back in the United States, Morgan Freeman was featured on 60 Minutes for what was intended to be a short segment on his trip to Africa. But when the cameras began to roll, the unexpected occurred once more. Morgan placed the letter from Ibrahim Traoré on the table. "This," he stated, his voice trembling, "this is the most powerful letter I have ever held in my life." He paused, then, with unsteady hands, he started to read a portion he had not previously shared. "Dear Morgan, you have unknowingly been a mentor to millions in Africa. Your voice reached my people long before any government aid ever did. When we had no electricity, your words still filled the air through old radios powered by hope." Morgan stopped, his voice breaking as tears filled his eyes. He whispered, "He called me a light, but he doesn't realize he became mine." The studio was silent. No cue cards, no edits, just pure, unfiltered emotion. Within hours, that moment went viral. Millions watched it, millions wept, and most importantly, millions now knew the name Ibrahim Traoré and understood how a single letter could change the world. The days that followed were extraordinary. Major news organizations covered the story, with Freeman and Traoré trending worldwide. Schools started asking for copies of the letter. UPRA, deeply moved by the broadcast, called it a masterclass in humanity. Morgan's inbox was flooded with emails from teachers in South Africa, youth leaders in Brazil, and even a prison chaplain in the U.S. Each message conveyed the same sentiment. This letter did not just speak to Morgan Freeman, it spoke to everyone. Donations surged to support the Kosi Freeman School in Burkina Faso. In just 2 days, enough was raised to construct 3 additional schools in the region. Then came another surprise. Ibrahim Traoré released a short video message. No suit, no flags, just him standing beside schoolchildren under a setting sun. "This is not a story about one man," he said. "It is a story about all of us, about choosing compassion even when no one is watching. Let's build more light together." His calm, steady words resonated across the globe. He did not seek accolades, but the world offered them anyway, not to a politician, but to a humble servant of his people. 1 week after the letter was first read, Morgan Freeman was back in his quiet home in Mississippi. He placed the letter in a glass frame on the wall above his writing desk. But he did more than that. He announced the formation of a new foundation, the Kosi Project, Stories That Heal. Its purpose is to fund educational and storytelling programs in underserved African communities. Its first official partner, the Office of the President of Burkina Faso. During his first live stream for the project, Morgan looked straight into the camera. "I once believed my greatest legacy was what I created on film," he said, "but I was mistaken. It was in a letter from a man who saw the world not for what it is, but for what it could be." He then smiled softly. And it all started with a boy named Kosi and a leader named Ibrahim Traoré. The screen faded to black, leaving a final image, a single candle flame being passed from one child's hand to another, stretching across the globe. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, sharing how it made you feel. Was it the letter, the school, or the tears? We would love to hear from you. Let's fill this space with light together. Let's help this legacy thrive. And always remember, sometimes the most unassuming letter can ignite the most profound change.